that was because he didn't think he would have the willpower to resist all the jobs working for the military-industrial complex, companies like Dow and DuPont and that sort of thing. If he'd gotten himself a doctorate in theoretical chemistry, he thought that the money offers would be beyond his ability to walk away from, and so he walked away from it before that. And instead, we came out to California in August 1975 and started what was called the Anarcho Village, where it became sort of a writing and publishing colony, pretty much from the 70s through the mid 80s. And Kent was also one of the denizens of the Anarcho Village in Long Beach, California.
Jason asks, what in your words separates or is different about agorism or agorism from classical liberalism or libertarianism?
Okay, the question is, for those of you who didn't hear it, is what separates agorism from classical liberalism and libertarianism? Classical liberalism and libertarianism do not necessarily assume a stateless society or a stateless approach to attaining freedom. You can have a limited government constitutional system, and as Patrick Friedman talked about quite effectively in his talk, it didn't work in preserving liberty. It was a great idea. It was market tested, and it failed. It took a while. It restrained the growth, but ultimately I wasn't able to stop it. So what we're talking about is what the Declaration of Independence calls new guards, basically new strategies for trying to achieve a free society. And seasteading is an approach that Patrick Friedman has been working in, and counter-economics is an approach which a lot of agorists other than Patrick work in. I personally see it as the left and right hand of the same agorist strategy.
Okay, Ethan is saying, I've read the bio, it's publicly accessible because I just posted it, the one your Spanish tribute. But I'm more curious about the personality of the man, stories Neil can't have from the old days, his interactions at various libertarian movement events, the party purges. Why don't you talk about those counter-cons that you organized and the purges?
Well, I mean, all right. Well, first of all, Sam was purged in 1969 from the Young Americans for Freedom for supporting the anti-draft libertarian position. And at that time, the issue of, it was both the issue of the draft and the issue of legalizing drugs, which was sort of like the division between the libertarians and the conservatives back then. Sam went with the trads and the libertarians, right? So after that, Sam started hanging around with libertarians, first a little bit in Wisconsin, but largely in New York, and founded the NYU Libertarian Alliance. And the way that I met Sam was because I had started a libertarian group called the Borough of Manhattan Community College Libertarian Coalition on my campus. And so the first time Sam and I ever walked into a room together at a meeting of the New York Libertarian Association in Gary Greenberg's living room, Sam was interested in talking to me because I had already started the campus libertarian group. And so we started hanging out. He was publishing a newsletter. I started writing for it. I started collating, folding, and stapling it, and became more and more involved with it until instead of becoming NYU Libertarian Notes, it became New Libertarian Notes, and then from there New Libertarian, and then from there New Libertarian Weekly, and and every possible variation. But in essence, Sam and I became publishing partners, and we even intended to collaborate on writing a book together called Counter Economics. And instead, when we weren't able to sell it, he went on to write the New Libertarian Manifesto, and I went on to write alongside Knight. But Sam did do additional work years later on finishing the manuscript of Counter Economics, and I believe that manuscript is in the hands of Victor Coleman, who tells me that he's going to make it available for publication one of these days. Okay, now in terms of Sam's personality, Sam thought like a scientist. His background was in science. He was deeply rooted in the history of libertarian thought. He was a scholar in this. He was an inveterate pipe smoker. He didn't believe in drinking any beer that you could see through. He was a science fiction and fantasy fan of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, Robert Heinlein, and Doc Smith, and of course, everybody else who was considered, libertarian and hard science in the field of science fiction and fantasy. Um, Went to a lot of science fiction conventions, held a lot of room parties, and was rarely seen during daylight hours during these events. Sam basically got up when the party started, and is actually a habit which a lot of us have to this day. Uh, I thought I was supposed to be giving this talk at 11 a.m. today. Nobody told me it was 11 a.m. Eastern, which would have been 8 o'clock my time. 8 o'clock, my friends, is roughly when just a couple of hours after I get to bed. So that wasn't going to happen. Okay, next.
Someone was asking, would you classify agorism as anarchist? How would it be different from pure anarchy? And I've been putting my 2 cents in there, but and someone also said, do you think that people participating in the underground economy without any understanding of agorism or agorism? I say agorism because that's how Sam said it, and when I asked him, he said agorism. Perhaps the classical Greek people that Neil listens to said agorism,
look,
so whatever.
You say potato, I say potato. I don't
whatever.
care.
I call it agorism. I'm sorry.
The question is it anarchism? Okay, and I would say yes, it is anarchism unless you're not an anarchist. Now that may seem like a Weasley answer, but let me tell you where I think the division happens. It happens with the general submission to arbitration, which you can now find on the website of the Center for a Stateless Society, and Brad Spangler talks about it in his talk. The general submission to arbitration, first written by Ralph Fusatola, and then I quoted from it fairly broadly in Alongside Night, is the idea that you sign a consent that that anybody can come and sue you in private arbitration if they feel that you violated their rights, if you've invaded them, if you've violated contract with them, if you've done any tort damage to them, if you've committed a crime against them. It basically is a way of placing yourself under law and order. Now, most people using the term anarchy would not think that that's an anarchist society, but it's entirely 100% voluntarily, in the same way that L. Neil Smith's unanimous consent form is entirely voluntary. But what the general submission to arbitration does is it takes you out of the realm of saying that you're above the law. And so if the state wants to be regarded as lawful, they also have to make everybody who operates for the state subject to being sued. And that means you do away with the concept entirely of sovereign immunity. I would say that the state is imperialistic always. Every state is imperialistic in the sense that it places itself above the law. It doesn't allow itself to be brought to the bar.
Now, I would say that without even officially acknowledging that general submission to arbitration, if you merely practice counter-economics without violating, being non-coercive and just being if you were libertarian in theory and counter-economic in practice, even without a general submission to arbitration, I would still call you an agorist. But that's
Okay, well, for those of you who weren't able to hear what Kent was saying, he was saying that practicing counter-economics and not violating anybody else's rights puts you into the realm of agorism, even if you don't have a general submission to arbitration. Look, if you're Amish, or pacifist or something like that, and you're not going around violating anybody's rights, then it's hard to say that you would be unagoric if you were if you were living a peaceful life and not violating anybody else's rights, even if you're not subject to a general submission to arbitration. But generally, okay, I would say that the crossover where it becomes feasible as a worldwide successful movement is when you basically can undercut the idea that the state is lawful. In fact, the state is unlawful. The agorist objection to the state is that it's criminal, that it is unlawful, that it operates capriciously, that it operates coercively, that it violates rights, that it is in fact operating criminally. And so if we are going to replace the state with something which is workable, viable, strategically possible, then it has to be done in such a way as to create greater law and order than the state, not lesser law and order than the state.
Okay, got a few more questions here.
Sure.
Jason says, do you believe that Thomas Jefferson was actually an anarchist or a minarchist? if he had it as the U.S. was originally set up and rebirthed every often, would it work? And Nick says, I live in Arizona where there are a lot of so-called illegals. I think it would be a great group to turn onto agorism. So I often tell them that they are halfway there because they are working underground.
Okay,
And okay,
look, there are all sorts of things which are underground. Okay, Sam talked explicitly about coyotes, being able to transport people across borders in the New Libertarian Manifesto. You have pirates who basically hoisted the Jolly Roger and violated tariffs and maritime aggressiveness from various different empires, the Spanish, the British, the Dutch, so on and so forth. Um, just because you are operating outside the law doesn't mean that you're agorist. It requires a higher level of ethics than that. It requires a respect for property rights. And here's where we get into the usual accusation of what we're talking about as utopian. Oh, Neil, you're saying that you need to perfect mankind. You need to have a better class of people in order for this to work. Um, and that's a utopian accusation that we're stuck with these rotten old people that we have, and people are greedy and nasty and not inclined to play fair or follow the rules or be consistent, and that people are hypocrites, and you can't get anything to work, and then you get into the Christian argument. Well, that's because we're fallen. Okay, here's the way I look at it. Okay, you have people acting fairly and legitimately all the time. Okay, any society which operated uh, largely by criminal behavior is self-annihilating. It requires a fairly high level of reason and ethics to get anything to work. Okay, so we've got that going for us. That acting fairly and equitably has actually value in the marketplace. Okay, that if your word can be trusted, more people will want to do business with you. Even if they see you as a sucker, they're going to want to do business with you. Okay, if your word can be trusted, if your contract will be enforced, if you will act against your own economic interests because you gave your word that you would. Okay, um, so to that extent, that is the level of people which this has to attract. Now, I think that largely, and again, people aren't perfect. You're always going to have exceptions, various different lapses, which people could say are hypocritical. The question of whether somebody like Thomas Jefferson wanted to go all the way into no government, um, certainly he wanted to go a long way in that direction, but there were things that Thomas Jefferson wanted to do with tax money. I mean, he wanted there to be, public libraries, for example, and public education and institutions of higher learning, which were paid for with taxes. So even he thought that there were things that a state should do, which an agorist would see as starting off with the basis of coercion.
Tripoli pirates and all that kind of.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that was a defense. One can make an argument that that the Barbary pirates, fighting in the same area where we are for today, still Tripoli was a defensive action, so, which I certainly can't say about this new incursion into Tripoli. I can't see that that Gaddafi was presenting any immediate threat to the interests of the United States, and so they're not even playing by their old rules of engagement anymore, which leads me to believe that the state is far more unstable and far more chaotic than it's been in a while. It's getting more chaotic. It's getting more troublesome. It's lying more. It's covering up more, and that creates more market opportunities for people who really do want to live under law and order. And so, law and order needs to become a marketplace product. And
someone asked
yeah.
on that vein, of course.
Yes.
Kind of segues in. What is a general submission to arbitration?
General submission to arbitration is, in essence, where you are saying that this particular arbitrator will receive all complaints against me and it'll be arbitrated. And in Alongside Night, I have the Revolutionary Agorist Cadre itself, a revolutionary organization, which is protecting clients who are doing things which are against the law. That organization itself has a general submission to arbitration, so it can be sued even by members of the state. And conversely, to be able to sue, members of the state have to make themselves liable to be sued as well. So it's saying, if you want us to be lawful, you have to be lawful too. Next.
Okay, some points on here. Why don't you talk about the counter conferences and his publishing, New Libertarian Weekly